The attic smelled of dust and forgotten things. A mausoleum of memories Jamie Carter had never been allowed to touch. At 19, he stood trembling at the top of the creaky stairs, his flashlight cutting through the dimness, heart pounding like it might break free. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in his grandfather's sacred space, where secrets were buried deeper than the roots of the old oak outside. Jamie had always felt like an outsider in his own family. Growing up in Willow Creek, a sleepy town in upstate New York, he'd learned early to hide the truth about himself. The Carter family was the kind of American clan that wore their normalcy like a badge: church on Sundays, potlucks in the summer, and a legacy of stoic, hard-working men who didn't talk about feelings, especially not those kinds. But Jamie was different. He'd known it since he was 12, when he'd caught himself staring too long at Ryan Delgado, the quarterback with a smile that could melt glaciers. Coming out in a town like this felt like signing up for exile, and Jamie had spent years convincing himself he was the only one carrying this secret. Until today, he'd overheard his mother, Ellen, whispering to Aunt Clara about Dad's old letters in the attic, her voice tight with something Jamie couldn't place: grief, maybe, or fear. Grandpa Henry had passed away 6 months ago, leaving behind a legacy of stern silences and a locked trunk that no one dared open. The family called it his war chest, assuming it held relics from his time as a Navy medic in Vietnam. But Ellen's tone had sparked something in Jamie: a reckless, desperate need to know. If there was a chance, however small, that Grandpa had hidden something real, something that could make Jamie feel less alone. He had to find it. The attic was a maze of cardboard boxes and moth-eaten blankets. Jamie's flashlight beam landed on the trunk, its leather cracked but sturdy, a padlock glinting like a warning. His hands shook as he pulled out the key he'd swiped from his mother's jewelry box, an old brass thing she thought she'd hidden well. The lock clicked open, and Jamie's breath caught. Inside were no medals or dog tags, but stacks of yellowed envelopes tied with twine, addressed in a looping scrawl to someone named Eddie. Jamie's fingers hesitated over the first letter. This felt like trespassing, like stepping into a room where the air didn't belong to him. But he was tired of hiding, tired of being the only one. He slid the letter out, its paper fragile as a moth's wing, and began to read. My dearest Eddie, I don't know if these words will ever reach you, but I write them anyway, because not writing feels like letting you go. It's 1968, and the world is burning: Vietnam, the protests, my own heart. I see you in every sunset, every time the ocean crashes against this godforsaken shore. Jamie's pulse roared in his ears. Grandpa Henry had written this. The man who'd once grounded him for wearing nail polish, who'd preached about traditional values at every family dinner. The words didn't make sense, but they pulled Jamie in like a riptide. He read on, letter after letter, each one more desperate, more tender, painting a picture of a love that had no place in the world Henry had lived in. A love for a man. By the time Jamie heard his mother's footsteps on the stairs, he was halfway through the stack, tears streaking his face. Jamie. Ellen's voice was sharp, panicked. What are you doing up here? He turned, clutching the letters, his voice barely a whisper. Mom, who was Eddie? Ellen froze, her face paling as if she'd seen a ghost. For a moment, the attic was silent except for the creak of the house settling, the weight of decades pressing down. Then she sank to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she reached for the letters. Oh, Jamie, she whispered. I didn't want you to find out like this. Find out what? His voice cracked, raw with hope and fear. Was Grandpa, was he like me? Ellen's eyes met his, and for the first time, Jamie saw something break in her, something she'd been holding together for years. Your grandfather, she said softly, loved someone he could never have. And it broke him. Jamie's world tilted. He wasn't the first. He wasn't alone. But the truth came with a Costa story of love and loss that spanned generations, waiting to be uncovered. He gripped the letters tighter, knowing that whatever came next, there was no going back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Ellen led Jamie downstairs, the letters tucked safely in his backpack. She didn't ask him to give them back, and he didn't offer. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Grandpa Henry had once carved his initials as a boy, and Ellen began to talk. Her words were halting, like she was pulling them from a place she'd locked away long ago. "Your grandfather was a good man," she said, staring at her coffee mug. "But he was a product of his time. The 60s, the 70s, they weren't kind to people like him. Or like you." Her eyes flicked up, meeting Jamie's, and he saw the apology in them. He met Eddie during the war. They were both medics, stationed together in Da Nang. From what I pieced together, they were everything to each other. But it was dangerous. Impossible. Jamie's throat tightened. "What happened to Eddie?" Ellen shook her head. "I don't know. Dad never told me the whole story. After the war, he came back, married Grandma Ruth, had me. But those letters, he kept them hidden. I found them once when I was your age, and he was furious. Said they were private, that I wouldn't understand." Jamie's mind raced. He wanted to know everything needed to. But Ellen's face was a map of grief, and he couldn't push her further tonight. Instead, he went to his room. The letters spread across his bed like a puzzle. Each one revealed more of Henry's heart, his fear of being discovered, his longing for a life he couldn't have, his guilt for loving someone he was taught to believe was wrong. But there was no mention of what had happened to Eddie. Only a final letter dated 1970, abruptly cut off. "If I don't make it back, know that you were my reason for fighting." The next morning, Jamie woke with a fire in his chest. He couldn't let this go. If Eddie was still out there, if there was any chance of finding him, Jamie had to try. It wasn't just about Grandpa Anna Maria, it was about proving that love like theirs, like his, could survive. He started with the only clue he had, Eddie's last name, scrawled on an envelope: Martinez. Willow Creek wasn't exactly a hub of information, but Jamie knew someone who might help. Ryan Delgado, now a barista at the local coffee shop, had been Jamie's high school crush and was one of the few openly queer people in town. If anyone could understand, it was him. Jamie found Ryan behind the counter, his dark hair falling into his eyes, that same heart-stopping smile lighting up the room. "Hey, Carter," Ryan said, leaning on the counter. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jamie hesitated, then slid an envelope across the counter. "I kind of have," he said. "Can we talk? Somewhere private." Ryan's brows lifted, but he nodded, leading Jamie to a corner booth. As Jamie explained the letters, Ryan's expression shifted from curiosity to awe. "Your grandpa, the guy who used to glare at me for wearing eyeliner. That's wild." "I need to find this Eddie guy," Jamie said, his voice urgent. "If he's still alive, he deserves to know Grandpa never forgot him." Ryan leaned back, thoughtful. "Okay, but where do you start? It's been, what, 50 years? He could be anywhere." Jamie didn't have an answer, but he had a plan. He'd start with the internet, then the library, then every veteran's record he could get his hands on. This was bigger than him now, a thread connecting his past to his future, a chance to rewrite the story he'd always thought was his alone. The library smelled of old paper and ambition, a quiet haven where Jamie hoped to unearth the past. He sat at a corner table, surrounded by stacks of microfilm and veteran records, his laptop glowing with search results for Edward Martinez. Vietnam War. Ryan lounged across from him, scrolling through his phone, occasionally tossing out ideas or bad puns to lighten the mood. Jamie's heart raced not just from the search, but from the way Ryan's knee brushed his under the table. A fleeting touch that felt like a spark. They'd been at it for hours, and the leads were thin. Thousands of Edward Martinez's existed, but none matched the profile of a Navy medic from 1968. Jamie's hope began to waver, but Ryan's presence kept him grounded. "You're not giving up already, are you?" Ryan teased, nudging him. "This is like a queer detective novel. We're basically superheroes." Jamie managed to smile, but his mind was elsewhere, tangled in Grandpa Henry's words. The letters had revealed a man Jamie never knew, passionate, vulnerable, torn between duty and desire. One passage haunted him. "Eddie, I dream of a world where we could walk hand in hand. No shame, no fear. But this world isn't ready for us." Jamie wanted to believe the world had changed, but Willow Creek's sidelong glances and whispered gossip told him otherwise. Finding Eddie wasn't just about closure, it was about proving that love like theirs could endure. Ryan's voice broke through his thoughts. "Yo, check this out." He turned his phone toward Jamie, showing a grainy photo from a Vietnam War veterans reunion blog. It was a group shot, men in their 70s. But one face stood out, a man with kind eyes and a familiar jawline. Labeled Ed Martinez, Navy medic. Da Nang 68 to 70. Jamie's breath caught. It was him. It had to be. The blog mentioned Ed living in Albany, just 2 hours away. Jamie's fingers flew across his keyboard, cross-referencing the name with public records. An address popped up: Edward R. Martinez, 74, retired nurse. Jamie's heart pounded. "This is it," he whispered. "He's alive." Ryan grinned. "Road trip." Jamie hesitated. Showing up at a stranger's door with 50-year-old love letters was insane. Right. But the alternative, living with the what-ifs, was worse. He nodded. Road trip. The drive to Albany was a blur of autumn leaves and nervous energy. Ryan insisted on blasting a playlist of queer anthems, singing off-key to Lady Gaga while Jamie clutched the letters in his lap. "You're gonna have to talk to him. You know," Ryan said, glancing over. "What's your plan? Just hand him the letters and hope he doesn't freak out." "I don't know," Jamie admitted. I need him to know Grandpa loved him, that it mattered." Ryan's expression softened. "You're braver than you think, Carter." The words hit Jamie harder than he expected. Brave wasn't a word he'd ever associated with himself. He'd spent years hiding, dodging questions about girlfriends at family dinners, pretending he didn't flinch at his uncle's casual slurs. But this driving toward a stranger who held the key to his grandfather's heart felt like stepping into a storm. They pulled up to a modest brick house on a quiet street, the kind of place where neighbors waved and kids rode bikes. Jamie's stomach churned as he knocked on the door, Ryan at his side like a lifeline. The man who answered was older than the blog photo, his hair silver, but his eyes still kind, crinkling with curiosity. "Can I help you boys?" "Mr. Martinez." Jamie's voice shook. "I'm Jamie Carter, Henry Carter's grandson." Ed's face changed, a flicker of something recognition. Maybe. Or pain. "Henry," he said softly, like the name was a bruise he hadn't touched in years. "Come in." The living room was warm, cluttered with photos and books. Ed gestured for them to sit, his hands steady but his eyes searching. Jamie fumbled with his backpack, pulling out the letters. "I found these in my grandpa's attic," he said, sliding them across the coffee table. "They're about you." Ed's fingers trembled as he touched the envelopes, his breath hitching. He didn't open them, just stared, as if the weight of 50 years had settled in his hands. "I never thought I'd see these again," he murmured. "Henry, he kept them." Jamie nodded, his throat tight. "He loved you. I think he always did." Ed's eyes glistened, and for a moment, he looked decades younger. like the man in Henry's letters. We were so young, he said. So scared. The war. The world. It didn't give us a chance. He paused, his gaze settling on Jamie. Why are you here? Son, what do you need from this? The question caught Jamie off guard. He'd been so focused on finding Ed. He hadn't thought about what came next. I'm gay, he blurted, the words spilling out like a confession. I thought I was the only one in my family. I thought I was wrong. But then I found these, and I needed to know. I needed to know you were real. Ed's expression softened, a mix of sorrow and understanding. You're not wrong, Jamie. And you're not alone. He glanced at the letters, then back at Jamie. Your grandfather, he was my world. But we couldn't be together. Not then. Ryan, silent until now, reached for Jamie's hand under the table. A quiet anchor. Jamie squeezed back, his heart full and breaking all at once. Ed began to talk, his voice steady but heavy, weaving a story of stolen moments in a war zone, of promises whispered in the dark, of a love that survived in secret but never in the open. By the time he finished, the sun was setting, and Jamie felt like he'd lived a lifetime in one afternoon. As they drove back to Willow Creek, Ryan turned down the music. You okay? He asked. Jamie nodded, though he wasn't sure. The letters had given him answers, but they'd also opened new questions about love, about family, about what it meant to be himself in a world that still wasn't always ready. I think I need to talk to my mom again, he said. There's more to this story. Ryan smiled, his hand brushing Jamie's arm. Whatever comes next, you've got this. And you've got me. The kitchen was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like the calm before a storm. Jamie sat across from his mother, Ellen. The letters spread between them like a bridge to a past neither fully understood. He'd spent the drive back from Albany replaying Ed's words, each one a shard of a life Grandpa Henry had kept hidden. Now, with Ryan waiting in the living room, Jamie needed answers from the one person who'd known Henry best. Mom, he started, his voice low but firm. Why didn't you tell me about Grandpa and Eddie? Ellen's hands tightened around her mug, her knuckles white. I didn't know how, she admitted. Your grandfather, he was my hero, but he was complicated. When I found those letters as a teenager, he told me they were a mistake, a sin. I believed him because I wanted to, but I saw how they haunted him. Jamie's chest ached. Haunted him how? Ellen sighed, her eyes distant. He'd get this look sometimes, like he was somewhere else. He'd sit on the porch, staring at that oak tree, and I'd know he was thinking about Eddie. After Grandma Ruth died, it got worse. He'd write in that journal you found, but he never let me read it. Said it was his way of making peace. Jamie pulled the leather journal from his backpack, its pages worn but heavy with untold stories. Did you ever read this? He asked, sliding it toward her. Ellen shook her head, her fingers brushing the cover. I couldn't. It felt like betraying him. Maybe it's time, Jamie said. For both of us. They opened the journal together, its pages filled with Henry's tight, careful handwriting. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, more a collection of thoughts, regrets, and prayers. One entry, dated 1995. Stopped Jamie cold. I saw a boy in town today, maybe 16, with painted nails and a smile like Eddie's. I wanted to tell him it's okay to be himself. But who am I to say that? I lived a lie, and now my grandson might pay the price. Jamie's breath hitched. He's talking about me, he whispered. He'd been 16 in 1995, experimenting with nail polish before Grandpa's disapproval shut him down. The realization hit like a wave. Henry had seen him, really seen him, and regretted his own silence. Ellen's eyes filled with tears. He loved you, Jamie. He just didn't know how to show it. Not with this. They read on, piecing together a man who'd fought to reconcile his faith, his family, and the love he'd buried. Henry wrote of Eddie's laughter, of nights spent patching wounds in a war zone, of a promise to find each other after the war, a promise broken by fear and circumstance. The final entry, written a month before Henry's death, was a letter to Jamie. If you ever find this, kid, know that I'm sorry. I wasn't brave enough to live my truth. But you can be. Be braver than me. Jamie closed the journal, his hands shaking. He knew, he said. He knew about me, and he still loved me. Ellen reached for his hand, her grip fierce. He did. And so do I. The next day, Jamie felt like he was walking on air and glass at the same time. The journal had given him a piece of his grandfather he'd never expected, a man who'd loved fiercely, even if he'd hidden it. But it also left him restless. He needed to do something, to honor Henry and Eddie's story. He found Ryan at the coffee shop, wiping down tables, and spilled everything. Ryan listened, his eyes wide. Dude, your grandpa was basically living a tragic romance novel. What are you going to do with all this? I don't know, Jamie admitted. But I want to tell their story. Not just for me, but for everyone like us. So no one feels alone. Ryan grinned, tossing a rag over his shoulder. Then let's make it happen. What if we, organized a thing? A reading? Or a memorial? Or, I don't know, something to share the letters. The idea sparked something in Jamie. Willow Creek wasn't exactly a bastion of progress, but maybe that was why it mattered. He spent the next week planning, with Ryan's help, a small event at the community center, reading of Henry and Eddie's letters, framed as a story of love and resilience. Jamie reached out to Ed, who agreed to attend, his voice thick with emotion over the phone. The night of the event, Jamie stood in front of a small crowd, locals, a few curious teens, and his mom, who sat in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. Ed sat beside her, his hands folded, a quiet strength in his posture. Jamie's voice shook as he began, reading Henry's words aloud. Eddie, you were my home in a world that felt like a battlefield. The room was silent, the weight of the words sinking in. Jamie glanced at Ryan, who gave him a nod, and kept going. He read of stolen glances, of promises made under starless skies, of a love that survived in secret. When he finished, there were tears in the crowd, and Ed stood, his voice steady as he added his own memories, moments Henry hadn't written down, like the time they danced in a monsoon, laughing until they couldn't breathe. As the crowd dispersed, Jamie felt lighter, like he'd set something free. Ed pulled him aside, his hand warm on Jamie's shoulder. You did good, kid, he said. Henry would be proud. The community center buzzed with quiet conversations as people lingered after the reading, their faces a mix of awe and unease. Jamie stood by the refreshment table, his heart still racing from sharing Henry and Eddie's story. He'd expected judgment from Willow Creek's older crowd, but most offered nods of respect, even if some were hesitant. Ryan was at his side, cracking jokes to ease the tension, but Jamie's eyes kept drifting to Ed, who was talking softly with Ellen near the stage. That was incredible, Ryan said, nudging Jamie. You made people feel something. That's not easy in a place like this. Jamie managed a smile, but doubt gnawed at him. Had he done enough? The letters were out in the open now, but what did that mean for him? For his family? He glanced at his mom, who caught his eye and gave him a small, proud nod. It was a start, but Jamie knew this was only the beginning. Ed approached, his expression warm but heavy. Jamie, I've got something for you. He pulled a small, faded photo from his wallet, young Henry and Ed, arms slung around each other, grinning in their Navy uniforms. This was taken in '69. I thought you should have it. Jamie's fingers brushed the photo, his throat tight. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything." Ed's eyes softened. "You're giving us a second chance, kid. A way to be remembered, right?" Back home, Jamie couldn't sleep. The photo sat on his nightstand, Henry and Ed's smiles haunting him. He'd shared their story, but it felt unfinished. The letters ended abruptly, and Ed hadn't known what happened after Henry returned to the States. Jamie needed closure not just for them, but for himself. He was tired of hiding, of carrying the weight of being the only one. The journal mentioned a promisea plan for Henry and Ed to meet after the war. What had stopped them? The next morning, Jamie called Ed, his voice shaky but determined. "Did Grandpa ever try to find you after the war?" There was a long pause on the line. "He wrote me once," Ed said finally. "In '71. Said he was getting married, that it was the only way to move forward." I was angry, hurt. I didn't write back. I thought he'd chosen a different life. Jamie's heart sank. "But he didn't stop loving you." "I know that now," Ed said softly. "But back then, we were both scared. The world wasn't kind to men like us." Jamie hung up, his mind racing. He needed to know what had happened in those missing years. He turned to the journal again, searching for clues. One entry, dated 1971, caught his eye. "I saw Eddie's name in a newspaper today alive. Thank God. I wrote to him, but I'm afraid it's too late. Ruth is pregnant, and I have to be the man they expect." The newspaper. It was a long shot, but Jamie headed back to the library, Ryan in tow. They dug through digitized archives from the early '70s, searching for any mention of Edward Martinez. After hours of scrolling, Ryan pointed at the screen. There. It was a small article from an Albany paper. 1971, local veteran honored for community service. The photo showed a young Ed, his smile strained but proud, accepting an award for volunteering at a veterans hospital. Jamie's pulse quickened. This was what Henry had seen, a sign that Ed was alive, moving forward without him. "That's why he didn't try harder," Jamie said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He thought Ed was okay. He thought he had to let him go." Ryan's hand rested on his shoulder. Maybe he was trying to protect him. And himself. Jamie nodded, but the realization stung. Henry had chosen duty over love, a choice that shaped their family for decades. Jamie didn't want to make the same mistake. He thought of Ryan, the way his laugh lit up a room, the way his touch made Jamie feel seen. He wasn't ready to say it out loud, but the spark between them was undeniable. That evening, Jamie invited Ryan over for dinner. Ellen had insisted, saying it was time they stopped sneaking around like teenagers. The meal was simple spaghetti and meatballs, but the conversation was anything but. Ellen asked Ryan about his plans, his art, his life as an openly queer man in Willow Creek. Jamie watched, amazed, as his mom leaned in, genuinely curious. After dinner, Jamie and Ryan sat on the porch, the oak tree looming in the moonlight. "Your mom's cool," Ryan said, his voice soft. "She's trying." "Yeah," Jamie said, his heart full. "She's learning. Like me." Ryan turned to him, his eyes searching. "What are you learning, Carter?" Jamie took a deep breath, the words he'd held back for years spilling out. "That I don't want to hide anymore. Not from my family, not from this town, and not from you." Ryan's smile was slow, warm, like the first light of dawn. "Good," he said, leaning closer. "Because I'm not going anywhere." They kissed under the oak tree, a quiet promise in the shadow of Henry's secrets. For the first time, Jamie felt like he belonged not just to his family, but to himself. The kiss lingered in Jamie's mind like a melody, replaying every time he caught Ryan's eye. It was a new kind of courage, one that made his heart race and his steps lighter. But even as he savored the warmth of that moment under the oak tree, the weight of Henry and Eddie's unfinished story pressed against him. Jamie wanted to honor their love, to give it the ending they'd been denied. He just didn't know how. The next morning, he found himself back in the attic. The trunk open, its contents now familiar, but no less heavy. He'd read every letter, every journal entry, but one item remained untouched, a small, locked box tucked in the corner of the trunk. It was unassuming, barely larger than a book, with a tiny keyhole that matched nothing Jamie had found. His fingers traced its surface, curiosity burning. What else had Grandpa Henry hidden? He called Ed, hoping for answers. Did Grandpa ever mention a box? Jamie asked, describing it over the phone. Ed's voice was thoughtful. Not directly, but he used to talk about keeping something safe, something he couldn't bear to lose. I thought he meant the letters. Jamie's pulse quickened. I'm gonna open it. Can you come over? I think you should be here. Ed arrived that afternoon, his presence a quiet anchor. Ellen joined them in the attic, her face a mix of apprehension and resolve. Jamie used a hairpin to pick the lock, a trick Ryan had taught him, much to Ellen's amusement. The box clicked open, revealing a single item, a silver ring, engraved with the initials H and E. Ed's breath caught, his hand trembling as he reached for it. He kept it. He whispered, "We made these in Da Nang. Had a local craftsman engrave them. We swore we'd wear them one day, when the world was different." Jamie's eyes stung. Why didn't he give it to you? Ed shook his head, his voice thick. He tried. That letter in 71. He wanted to meet, to start over. But I was stubborn. I thought he'd chosen Ruth over me. I didn't know about the ring. Ellen's hand rested on Ed's shoulder, a silent gesture of understanding. Jamie felt the weight of their shared grief, but also a spark of purpose. We can still make this right, he said. For both of you. The idea came to him that night, as he lay awake staring at the photo of Henry and Ed. A memorial, not just a reading, but a permanent tribute to their love. Willow Creek had a small park, a place where families gathered and kids played. What if there was a bench, a plaque, something to say that Henry and Eddie's love existed, that it mattered? He pitched the idea to Ryan over coffee, his words tumbling out. It's not just about them, Jamie said. It's about showing everyone here that love like this isn't something to hide, that it's worth celebrating. Ryan's eyes lit up. That's big, Carter. But it's going to take work. The town council's not exactly progressive. I know, Jamie said, determination settling in his chest. But I'm not doing this alone. They spent the next week rallying support. Ryan used his charm to convince local businesses to donate, while Jamie and Ellen drafted a proposal for the town council. Ed offered to speak, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime. The meeting was tense, with some council members balking at the idea of a controversial memorial. But Jamie stood at the podium, his voice steady, and told Henry and Eddie's story, not just the love, but the sacrifice, the courage it took to survive in a world that didn't accept them. To his surprise, the community showed up. Neighbors, classmates, even some of the churchgoers who'd once side-eyed him. When Ed spoke, his words quiet but powerful, the room fell silent. Henry and I didn't get our happy ending, he said. But this giving our story a place in the light, that's enough. The council approved the memorial, a simple bench with a plaque that read, "For Henry and Eddie, who loved in silence, but live on in truth." Jamie felt a weight lift, like he'd carved out a space for himself in the process. The dedication ceremony was small but heartfelt. Jamie stood beside the bench, Ryan's hand in his, as Ed unveiled the plaque. Ellen wiped tears from her eyes, and the crowd, larger than Jamie expected, clapped softly. For the first time, Jamie felt like Willow Creek was his home, not just a place to survive. Afterward, Ryan pulled him aside, his grin mischievous. "You did it, Carter. You're officially a legend." Jamie laughed, his heart full. "We did it. And I'm not done yet." Ryan raised a brow. "Oh, what's next?" Jamie took a deep breath, the words he'd rehearsed spilling out. "I want to be with you. For real. No hiding. No pretending. I want what Henry and Eddie didn't get a chance." Ryan's smile softened, and he leaned in, their foreheads touching. "You've got it," he whispered. The bench became a quiet landmark in Willow Creek, a place where Jamie found himself returning again and again. He'd sit there in the early mornings, the plaque's words catching the dawn light, and feel a connection to Henry and Eddie that grew stronger with each visit. It wasn't just their story he was carrying, no, it was his own. Coming out to his mom, kissing Ryan under the oak tree, standing up to the town council, they were steps toward a life he'd never dared imagine. But the journey wasn't over. Ryan had become a constant in Jamie's life, their relationship blossoming in ways that made Jamie's heart ache with possibility. They'd spend evenings at the coffee shop, Ryan sketching while Jamie read, their hands brushing over shared cups of coffee. But even as Jamie leaned into this new happiness, he couldn't shake the sense that there was more to uncover. The ring, the letters, the bench, they were pieces of a puzzle. But the picture was still incomplete. One afternoon, Ed called with news that sent Jamie's heart racing. "I found something," Ed said, his voice tinged with excitement. "An old friend from the Navy reached out. He knew Henry and me back in Da Nang. He's got a box of photos and letters, says there's stuff in there we need to see." Jamie drove to Albany the next day, Ryan in the passenger seat, the anticipation electric between them. Ed's friend, a grizzled veteran named Tom, welcomed them into his cluttered apartment. The box was unassuming, but its contents were a revelation: photos of Henry and Ed in their youth, laughing in grainy black and white, and a handful of letters Henry had sent to Tom for safekeeping. One letter, dated 1972, stopped Jamie cold. "Tom, if anything happens to me, make sure Eddie knows I never stopped loving him. Ruth is my family now, but he's my heart. I'm trying to be the man they need, but it's killing me." Jamie handed the letter to Ed, whose hands shook as he read it. "He never told me," Ed whispered. "All these years, I thought he'd moved on." Tom clapped a hand on Ed's shoulder. "Henry was torn up about it. Said he couldn't risk dragging you into his mess. He thought you were better off without him." Ed's eyes glistened, but he smiled a sad, grateful thing. "He was wrong," he said, "but I understand now." Back in Willow Creek, Jamie shared the new letters with Ellen. They sat on the porch, the oak tree casting long shadows, and read together. The letters painted a clearer picture of Henry's struggle, his love for Eddie, his duty to his family, his fear of losing both. Ellen's voice was soft as she spoke. "I wish I'd known how much he was hurting. Maybe I could have helped." Jamie reached for her hand. "You're helping now? By letting me tell this story. By being okay with me." Ellen squeezed his hand, her smile bittersweet. "I'm more than okay, Jamie. I'm proud." That night, Jamie and Ryan lay on a blanket in the backyard, staring at the stars. The letters and photos were tucked safely in Jamie's room, but their weight lingered. "What do you think Henry would say if he saw us now?" Jamie asked. Ryan turned to him, his eyes bright in the moonlight. "I think he'd say you're doing what he couldn't. Living your truth." Jamie's heart swelled. He leaned in, kissing Ryan softly, the world fading to just the two of them. For the first time, he felt free, not just from fear, but from the need to prove himself. Henry and Eddie's love had survived in secret. Jamie's would live in the open. The next step came naturally. Jamie wanted to expand the memorial, to make it a space for others to share their stories. He and Ryan started a community group, small at first. Just a handful of queer teens and allies meeting at the coffee shop. They called it the Bench Project, a place to talk about love, identity, and resilience. Ed joined when he could, his stories of the past weaving into the hopes of the present. One evening, a shy girl named Mia shared her own story of coming out, her voice trembling but growing stronger with every word. Jamie watched, his heart full, as Ryan squeezed her hand, offering the same quiet support he'd given Jamie. The group was small, but it was a starter ripple that could grow. As the meeting ended, Jamie stood by the bench, Ryan at his side. "This is what it's about, isn't it?" he said, making sure no one feels alone. Ryan nodded, his arm around Jamie's waist. "Yeah, and you're making it happen." The seasons turned in Willow Creek, the oak tree shedding its leaves and blooming anew, much like Jamie's life. The Bench Project grew, drawing more voices: teens, parents, even a few elders who'd carried their own secrets for decades. The bench by the park became a quiet sanctuary, a place where people left notes, flowers, or just sat to feel less alone. Jamie often found himself there, the plaque's words a reminder of Henry and Eddie's love, and of his own journey. He and Ryan were inseparable now, their relationship a steady anchor. They'd faced their share of whispers in town, but Jamie no longer flinched at the stares. He'd learned to carry his truth like a badge, just as Henry had wished in his journal. Ellen had become their biggest supporter, hosting Bench Project meetings at the house, her kitchen filled with laughter and stories. Ed visited often, his presence a bridge between past and present, his stories of Henry grounding the group in a shared history. One spring morning, Jamie received a package from Tom, the Navy veteran. Inside was a final letter, one Henry had written but never sent, dated 2005. It was addressed to Eddie. "I'm an old man now, and I've made my peace with God. I hope you found happiness. Eddie, I never stopped loving you, and I hope one day our story helps someone else be brave." Jamie's eyes stung as he read it. He drove to Albany that afternoon, Ryan at his side, to give the letter to Ed. They sat in Ed's living room, the silver ring glinting on the coffee table. Ed's hands trembled as he read, tears falling freely. "He never gave up on us," he said, his voice breaking, "even at the end." Jamie reached for Ed's hand. "He'd be so happy to know you're here, that we're telling your story." Ed smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "You've given us both a kind of peace, Jamie. Thank you." The final piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly. A local journalist, moved by the Bench Project, wrote an article about Henry and Eddie's story, calling it a testament to love's endurance. The article spread, picked up by larger outlets, and soon Jamie was fielding messages from across the country, people sharing their own stories, thanking him for giving them hope. The bench became a pilgrimage site of sorts, a quiet symbol of resilience. Jamie and Ryan stood by it one evening, the sun setting in a blaze of gold. "We did something real here," Ryan said, his hand in Jamie's. "You did." "We did," Jamie corrected, leaning into him. "And we're not done." They kissed, the world soft and warm around them, the oak tree standing witness. Jamie thought of Henry's final words in the journal, "Be braver than me." He'd done that, and more. He'd built a space where love didn't have to hide, where stories like his and Ryan's, like Henry and Eddie's, could live in the light. The future stretched out before him, full of possibility. Jamie knew there'd be challenges. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, and neither was the world. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had Ryan, Ellen, Ed, and a community growing stronger every day. Most of all, he had himself, whole and unashamed. As they walked away from the bench, hand in hand, Jamie felt Henry's presence, a quiet pride across the years. He wasn't the first, But he was part of a legacy, a chain of love and courage that would carry on. Unbroken.